Hello everyone, it's a pleasure to join you on this new video segment in this module and looking in this time in Shoeless chapter 7. So here's where things get a bit personalized in the course content, but there's a lot of purpose in it. This is of course after all the introduction to spirituality. Spirituality is a very personal thing. It's not just a bunch of abstract ideas about spirituality, but it's what we live. It's our very lives. So as St. Paul says in one of his letters, he longed to share his very life with the people he was serving and witnessing to. So the same is true for me, wanting to share my life with you in this course, even in this virtual platform, because God calls us to be witnesses, and when it comes to evangelization, when it comes to catechesis, teaching and learning, even in higher education, Catholic philosophy and theology, it's always appropriate to weave in reference to what one has experienced in this life, especially in terms of conversion, how God has been at work in one's life. So chapter 7 of this book, Shoeless, my wife Megan and I both share about some of our childhood experiences very briefly, but for the sake of putting flesh to thought more so in the telling of our story a little bit. How was it that we became third order Carmelites? What stirred in us? How did God move in us that this happened? How did we experience deeper conversion throughout our lives in so many different ways? So it's a beautiful exercise, and St. Francis de Sales talks about this, St. Ignatius of Loyola talks about this, that we really jog our memory way back throughout the course of our life. And I argue in this book, Shula, it's a really indispensable part of moving toward this prayer of recollection. Recall the whole of one's life, what God has been doing throughout one's life, all the way up into the present, what God wants to continue to do in one's life into the future. So maybe I'll just share a couple thoughts about my childhood in this video, and maybe comment on some things my wife shares here, although it'd be better for her to comment on it directly. But you have her testimony on these pages. So maybe I'll start with her and then move to myself. So when I think about my wife Megan, she was very moved with the example of her grandmother's and great-grandmother Dee Dee. She mentions in Northbrook, Illinois, who had this greenhouse and a seclusion that it was like, as she describes it, a secret garden, a garden enclosed, using the language there from the Song of Songs. At a very young age, it was a place that sparked wonder and awe, and was a place that she loved to be. And I like I like hearing this narrative of Megan, because knowing her quite well, she has a great love for nature and for gardening, for arboretums, but through her language, it's very intentional that there's reference to Carmel through this, because the word in Hebrew, Carmel, means garden of God, or paradise of God, Carmel. And so it's a symbolic language she's using too in this narrative, just a couple pages. But she recalls these things at a time in her life before her parents were divorced. And I can tell you, as I'm sure all of you know, how difficult divorce is on children. even, okay, I'm not going to say too much about all this, but she's going back to, you could say a happy place in her life when her mom and dad were there, and they went out into this 40-acre property they called McFarland, and where they would dream and they would enjoy the goodness of God's creation. And so she also talks about her experience at the Protestant Lake Lundgren Bible Camp, encountering Christ in a profound way there. Influence of her grandma Ellen, who was a real matriarch in the family. And how she played piano. She studied piano. She became a very good piano player. And using those gifts to serve other people. So all these things intersecting in her young life, her faith background, but above all, how all this relates to her relationship with God. And I really love the last paragraph. She writes, it's very poetic, on page 96. She said, despite my own failings and self-positioned hurdles, there were many little seeds planted. Like gardeners who plant perennials, the first year is a time of sleep for the plant. There is little growth to be seen above ground, but underneath the plant begins to take root in its new environment and feeds on the richness of its soil. Perhaps this dormancy of a perennial is similar to a time of recollection. And perhaps for me, these early years of my life were a time of soaking in all the richness of the soil of my environment in preparation for the next stage of the perennial life, creeping. I like how she puts that. It's very vivid imagery, thinking about the spiritual life and these stages, and that initially there's a lot's going on underground. The soul is a hidden mystery, a hidden reality that's expressed and manifest in and through the body, but the soul and the spiritual things going on in the soul are completely hidden to the world, as they should be. This is where God is interacting with the person in the most intimate recesses of the self, and there's a lot about it that is not for anyone else to observe directly, but only indirectly, and as a fruit of what God is doing in the soul. So it's the beginning stages of this prayer of recollection, gathering up one's life, gathering up the memories of life, remembering, recollecting, harvesting them all, synthesizing what's going on here, like the Blessed Virgin Mary did, which we read about earlier in chapter 5 of this book. The sintereo, symbolo, this rumination on all of these very rich memories of life. So I like to read what Megan has written here, and it just is very inspiring to me. And then moving toward that creeping stage of the life of the plant, the life of the soul, creeping into illumination toward spiritual union with God. So I will say one other thing she doesn't mention in this narrative. When I think of my wife's childhood, there's a video of her when she was probably around 5 years old or something in there. And she's a very joyful girl. And her dad was pushing her and her sister on this tire swing at a park. And she was singing some song she must have heard at church. I keep on falling in love with him over and over again. I keep on falling in love with Jesus over and over again. As a young child, she's singing this song. It's really instructive for us, I think. The witness of the child, just having all this abundant joy in the Lord and in His love, and that even as we grow older as adults, we need to retrieve that Kindertheology, that theology of childhood that's very ripe from the start. So some things about my wife's life, and maybe just a couple quick points from my own. Thinking about my childhood, starting on page 91 of Shoeless. Yeah, I definitely remember being drawn to silence and solitude at a very young age. And throughout my childhood, I love to ponder things. I love to think deep. I like to play, but I also like to get away from, I guess, noisy things and move toward very restful places apart from the crowd. I had just, yeah, kind of inbuilt inclination to do that, being young. Savor the sweetness of the gifts of God in this life. I was adopted 6 weeks after birth through Catholic Family Services, fortunately by John and Linda Wallenfang, and they were experiencing infertility and so adopted me. I'm very thankful for my parents, and there's this picture here on page 92 of them kissing me, one on each side of my face. And this picture is, for me, a relic of love, of their love for me, and one that in the family photo albums I never forgot about. And so at 42 years old, a year ago, I pulled this out of one of the keepsake bins, in storage, and was really thankful to find this picture and retrieve that memory again. And it's like that to me was the image of love, security, home, welcome. And as I quote from the prophet Zephaniah, to be rejoiced over with gladness, to be exalted over with loud singing as on a day of festival. That's what every one of us longs for, isn't it? Wanting to belong, wanting to be loved and affirmed for who we are. So as a child, that was big time. To have my mom and dad right there, loving me, delighting when I would dance in the house to music and my zip and the fireman's hat and whatever. Being loved. And that's what we can give to the children of today. That's what they crave. We are adopted sons and daughters of God, after all. And we've been called into this vocation of responsibility in this alter theology, this theology of adulthood as we get older. But just going back to a picture like this, can we give this to our own children and to those in our care, in ministry, in family, in life in general? We'll read again. Pope Benedict XVI in his encyclical Deus Caritas Est, we have this power given to us by God to give the other person the look of love which he or she craves. It's very true. We can do this every day. So, some takeaway points, I suppose, here. Yeah, this prayer I talk about learning in the 3rd grade of my Catholic school. I'll never forget it. Oh my God, tell me what you want me to do and help me to do it. Can you pray that prayer today? Can you pray it with perfect openness? Oh my God, tell me what you want me to do and help me to do it. It's a great challenge for us. It's such a simple prayer, but so powerful. And as I say, I never really could pray that honestly until my freshman year of college. I really started to pray it for the first time, as I was really growing leaps and bounds in my faith, and by the grace of God. And that prayer, a heart that can pray like that, lets God be at work. And so thinking about your own childhood, what God is revealing to you even now by going back over your childhood and contemplating who you are as a unique child of God to this day. What is the maturity of your own childhood that you would like to retrieve for the present? It's a great question. And I believe for each one of us, there's much there to be retrieved from our childhood. So as we try to move from vocal prayer to meditation to that prayer of recollection, going back over these memories of our life is a good way to move toward that prayer of recollection and gathering up of the soul. So thanks for letting me share a few memories with you from the Shoeless chapter 7 about Megan's life and my own. And in the discussion board, I look forward to the things you may share as well. Thanks so much.